Good morning, good evening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to thank you for joining us for the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which is hidden in darkness. For those of you joining us on the Life Online radio show, which is lifebroadcastingcenter.com, we welcome you in. For those of you joining us on YouTube, on the Silverlight channel, Silverlight, one word, we welcome you in. We wish to thank everybody for listening to us because we're brought to you by our affiliate, Affinity Writing and Editing Services, which is at Affinity WES, simple word, at Twitter, which is at Affinity WES, Writing and Editing Services. And they have brought everything to you today on our show. Now, what we'd like to do on this particular show is go back and visit some of the most interesting things in history. Things that were not edited to be what they were intended to be, but on the contrary, through our modern lens, as we look back through history, we see things as very different than any of them would have suspected. For the first example, I would like to turn to the War of the Worlds broadcast in 1938 by the famous actor Orson Welles. For those of you who are like me, who were born in the 1980s, Orson Welles is most famous as a voice actor. He voiced Unicron in the 1986 Transformers movie. I might be wrong on the exact year there. But the same token, he left a deep imprint on all of us. He had a voice that could move worlds. And I use that on purpose because that is exactly what they intended for him to do back in 1938. Orson Welles basically, well, in no uncertain terms, he put on a play that was a version of H.G. Wells' War of the World. Wells and Wells, united in eternity. The book written in 1898 about Martian invaders who come to our planet and destroy almost everything only to be destroyed by the most minute organisms was exactly what Orson Welles was presenting that day in 1938. Now, 1938 is a very pivotal year. In 1938, Hitler had just invaded Czechoslovakia. And indeed, tensions were rife worldwide. People were very nervous because all of a sudden Europe, which had been stable for 20 years, had suddenly gone into chaos and anarchy. The United States and Canada both had fascist leagues who were ready to set aside their patriotism and join Hitler's revolution, shall we call it. Needless to say, people were on edge. It was a very difficult time. That being said, this has widely been reported as a panic, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of actual evidence on the night of that people really panicked. A police officer stopped a couple teenagers, and when he asked what they were doing, they were trying to go somewhere that they could better hear the radio station because they knew the local theater would be doing something impressive that night. Throughout the entire broadcast, Orson Welles and his compatriots kept affirming that what they were doing was pure fiction. And they reminded everybody that things were happening, commercial breaks were coming up. So in the 1930s, radio was not an alien technology. It wasn't like World War I. It was just as common as TV was to you or I today. But rival newspapers got a hold of a few people cracking up and calling up to see if it was true and went bananas with it. They said, "Oh, let's paste this across our front page headlines," and they made this into a media circus. So much of a media circus, in fact, that the hype went international. The incident didn't go international. People were not jamming the streets. But if you listen to the opposing newspapers who were looking for some good copy press that day, they would have you believe that the world went ballistic. It didn't. That being said, Adolf Hitler himself, referring to the incident, said that it showed how decadent and weak the West was compared to his dictatorship. This is one of the most crucial things we must remember. In a dictatorship, information is very tightly controlled, whereas in our currently relatively free environment, it is loosely controlled, but at the same token, things leak through and people react the way we do because, I say this once again, we're all people. What relevance does the War of the Worlds broadcast have to the modern day, you might ask? And I would congratulate you for that sentiment. It's a long, winding turn, and for this we have to kind of go through the 1940s. Now, the 1940s were a great era for propaganda, and propaganda tells you what to believe. A good piece of fiction, a good piece of news, makes you question what you're doing, makes you think about what's happening. But propaganda tells you, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, this is the end result that will be best for you and me and everybody, our children and their grandchildren. This solves everything. You can make your own parallels to today's movies. It's pretty obvious. Back to the War of the Worlds broadcast. It had created a false narrative that people had freaked out simply because this play had been enacted on a time that most people knew that a play was happening, and when most people knew, just like today, the Sunday night movies that you turn over to are Sunday night movies. You don't need to freak out on Independence Day because, it's a 1997 mediocre action-adventure movie. Orson Welles' voice was not new. He was well known on his radio station, and his co-actors were also well known. Now, in 1947, almost coincidentally, 10 years later, things started to repeat themselves, except on a different level. You see, the Illuminati doesn't just test us, they also like to up the ante once in a while. So to begin with, I would like to pick up with Kenneth Arnold. Kenneth Arnold, which I've mentioned before, was a pilot. And while going over Mount Rainier, I believe, I might be pronouncing that wrong. Apologies to anybody in the Washington State area. I'm sorry, I don't know your local pronunciation. While he was going over there, he saw multiple discs. Now, Kenneth Arnold is credited with creating the word flying saucer, which is exactly how he described their movement. He described them as discs, but he was too far away really to get any sort of idea of what they really looked like. He could just see little silver discs in the distance, and the way they moved about was, exactly as he said, like skipping saucers over a pond. Just like you or I might skip stones over a pond, in his experience, he had skipped saucers over a pond. And that same rickety action going across the lake was exactly how these things seemed to be bouncing across him when he observed them. Now, Kenneth Arnold was a pretty good individual. He had served in the Air Force, he'd done his time in World War II, and he's a civil aviator. He was just a man who loved to fly. And in all honesty, he wasn't really a man who demanded attention in any way, shape, or form. He was happy to go with the flow. But he was assigned by the editors of Fate magazine, he was commissioned, would be a better word, to go and check the Maury Island incident. Because just after Kenneth Arnold had seen his flying saucers, again which refers to the motion, not to the craft, a gentleman named Fred Chrisman had reported that he and his worker, Harold Dahl, had had quite an extraordinary encounter. According to Harold Dahl and Fred Chrisman, which later became Fred Chrisman alone, Harold Dahl, Fred Chrisman, Harold Dahl's son, and the family dog were out cruising around looking for salvage, which in the late 1940s you could imagine would probably be pretty good. You get all sorts of iron and steel and crazy stuff like that just simply by pulling around the harbors because people threw stuff away then. That's the way the life was. Got a can? Throw it in the ocean. Got a pencil? Throw it in the ocean. Got anything? Throw it in the ocean. The ocean is infinite. It'll carry it away. Again, that's the way the mentality was. So they made their day-to-day existence simply by going around scooping up the crap, because there's no better word for it, and recycling it and selling it onwards. The difference is, Fred Chrisman was actually a World War II veteran. He'd been a pilot before, and in fact, he had been shot down before. He'd actually written into Fate magazine, the same people that sponsored Kenneth Arnold to come out and investigate, and he described this fantastical encounter of fighting off aliens in a cave for his survival. Fantastic, or was it? At any rate, Fred Chrisman and Harold, his subordinate, they reported that there was 6 oval-shaped UFOs in the air. Now keep in mind, Kenneth Arnold saw oval shapes, and Fred Chrisman saw oval shapes. So right now we have oval shapes everywhere. And supposedly of these 6 oval-shaped craft that are hovering in the air, 5 of them were trying to keep one of them from crashing, and through tractor beams, through whatever it might be. At that point, they had no idea that Star Trek was still 20 years away. But at that point, they saw that the other ones were attempting to assist the one that was disabled. The disabled one in the middle of the other 5 belched forth some sort of metal. And because the metal has never been identified, I'm just going to call it metal. And that metal came down, killed the dog, injured Harold's son, and after that, naturally, they got the heck out of the area. Kenneth Arnold got there, and being the experienced person that he was, immediately called in the military. Now, Kenneth Arnold and the military officers who were there interviewed everybody. Standard investigation procedure, nothing unusual there. But apparently, whatever the military officers came across is still classified to this day. Kenneth Arnold thought that Fred Chrisman was being a bit evasive with him, and Harold Dahl was most unwilling to participate any further with the interviews. So, Fred Chrisman has somehow taken over the entire weight of the Maury Island incident upon himself. And he has become the face of the Maury Island incident. This will come up later. Fred Chrisman immediately showed the military officers and Kenneth Arnold to the place where this had happened. And the military officers supposedly gathered up some alien material. By alien, I'm not saying from another world, I'm saying stuff they did not know about. They wrap up their investigation, they see each other off, they have a dinner together, it's all amicable. And then, on the way home, the 2 military officers are killed in a plane crash. The material is never found again. And the survivors of the plane crash, the NCOs, say that they were ordered to get off the plane by the lieutenants and captains, the COs. This is not unusual in a crash situation. Commissioned officers, COs, are expected to order the NCOs, non-commissioned officers, your sergeants, your corporals, your privates, all that sort of thing, off before they jump off. So here they are following military procedure. But the curious thing is, if they had this material that they did not know what it was and was being taken back for analysis, why wouldn't they have made sure some of it survived their plane crashes? When you're going into the dunk, when you're going into the drink with a plane, whatever you're going into, you know it's not going to be good for you. So they had a fairly good idea that might be their last final orders in telling the NCOs to get off the plane. So if they were carrying military sensitive or military critical information and materials, which they were carrying in documents and whatever material this flying saucer belched out, it's rather curious that they made sure everybody got out and the remains of what they had didn't. Kenneth Arnold reported back to Fate magazine, told his story, got paid, got out of there, and Fred Chrisman goes underground for about 10 years, and he eventually appears at the Kennedy assassination. Oh yes, we'll be covering that another time. Fred Chrisman's life is a very interesting life. But this isn't really where I want to take this, because we're more talking about effects on the public mind. And in 1947, we have the famous Roswell crash. Now, whatever happened at Roswell, something crashed there. And at that point they were not distinguished. It was the United States Army Air Force decided to retrieve what it initially described as a flying disc. Now, a flying disc immediately brings to mind Martians and all sorts of crazy stuff, but when you really think about it, any sort of alien civilization that could achieve interplanetary travel has no reason to come here. None whatsoever. Water, gold, resources, fuel, whatever they might want to do, they can get done in the outer solar system. They can be on Saturn while Cassini probe is passing by, and they can calculate the days that it's going by and either hide behind it, hide themselves, or, like the Klingons on Star Trek, can simply cloak and not be bothered by our little eyes in the sky out there. And there's so many bodies in the outer solar system, it would not behoove them to even come past Neptune, because, quite frankly, we're not that interesting as a species. If you're a starfaring civilization, you probably encountered dozens of people like us. And right now we're burning fossil fuels. We have basic nuclear technology, but we're not particularly interesting. You might send an anthropologist here or there, but it's really unlikely they're going to be gleaning any special information. And this is why I really doubt that we're going to hear anything from SETI. I respect SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. They do a lot of good work, but I find what they intend to do is very limiting. They search for radio emissions in the H band, the hydrogen band, because it has the least interference in the universe. That being said, virtually everybody I'm listening to right now is listening over a Wi-Fi connection, which does not go in the H band. So a lot of interference is happening on all the transmissions from Earth. There are very good scientists who have very good intentions who say we have a bubble of about 150 light years around us that has received Earth communications, which is true. I totally agree with that. But also what is true is they're not very good quality. Think about, well, maybe not everybody around here owns a radio like I do, but I have a 1930s radio. It's not the best thing to tune into things. It's not the best thing to tune into anything. And quite frankly, while its sound is superior once you get it tuned in, when it's not tuned in, it is a beast. When I'm in my car and I hit the dial and it automatically dials up 94.5 or 640 or whatever channel I decide, that is crystal clear technology. But it's also technology that's only valid for about 200 miles. We have problems communicating with the rovers on Mars. We send a couple every 2 years, and we still have about 4 minutes lag between us and them. Radio signals are not a good idea for a multiplanetary spacefaring civilization. And even now, 100 years ago, yes, we had a lot of radio signatures popping up. But right now, we're not having a lot of radio signatures going up. They're coming up from radar, they're coming up from weather probes, they're coming up from all sorts of things, but from actual terrestrial radio, there's not really that much because people are listening on the Wi-Fi, internet, anything they can do just so that way they can get a better signal. Personally, I like to listen to stations that are far outside my local area, not because of any insult to local radio stations, but just simply because I find a lot more out that way. But back to the 1940s. So, we don't have any evidence that even in 2020 that alien civilizations exist. But back in the 1940s, it was laughable. So when Kenneth Arnold went on his expedition to find some sort of extraplanetary craft that Fred Chrisman was going on about, Fate magazine was known kind of as the National Enquirer of the day. And probably worse off because Fate magazine would publish anything. Not anything, that's being harsh on them, but they were known for alien bug-eyed monsters invade Los Angeles in disguise. That was the kind of articles they liked to publish. And Fred Chrisman, as I said, had published a few articles that were humzingers as far as fiction. But the real star of 1947 is neither Kenneth or Chris. The real star is the Roswell incident. And here we get some really, really interesting problems coming up. And I say problems because the narrative is very, very confusing. Supposedly, and this is according to the United States Air Force records, supposedly they picked up on a couple objects that were going past supersonic, which again in 1947 was not possible, and they stopped suddenly and were hovering. And one of them eventually disappeared around the Roswell area, and it came down on a farmer's ranch. For about a week, nothing was said. And then the sensational tabloid headline was revealed. United States Army Air Force captures flying disc. Pretty awesome. I'd get into that. The problem being, once everything was revealed, the United States Army Air Force said, oh no, sorry, it wasn't a flying disc, it was a weather balloon. Now, a weather balloon is very different. A weather balloon appears very different on a radar than does a flying disc, then does a plane, then does a stealth aircraft, then does anything else. A weather balloon is generally coated in tinfoil, so it shows up like a big red blonk in the middle of the radar. A weather balloon doesn't suddenly go supersonic and then slow to a hover. No matter what, let's pretend for a second that the reports that we have from that day are not relevant. And the only thing we know is that the United States Army Air Force, because it was not an independent service yet, somehow collected something from a farmer's field in Roswell. Now I encourage you, go back, look at the photographs that were being taken. And honestly, it's like they've never seen a weather balloon before. It's a balloon. Balloon technology has been around since the 1790s. And these people are looking at it like they've never seen anything even remotely close to it before. So, what I'm proposing is whatever the United States Army Air Force recovered, it was not an American, Canadian, British, French, German, nor similar aircraft. I'm not saying it's extraterrestrial. Let's just eliminate the possibilities that we have. Again, this mysterious aircraft penetrated United States airspace. It made a couple weird flips and loops and appeared to be hovering in the air a few times and then crashed around Roswell. Well, in the late part of the war, Adolf Hitler had his 1,000 bomber recommendation, 1,000 miles per hour, 1,000 pounds worth of bombs. And the Horten brothers, the two Horten brothers, who were famous for their flying wings, submitted one of their aircraft for consideration. Now, the Horten brothers, after World War II, disappeared for about 3-4 years. And when this aircraft crashed, supposedly, whatever it was, it had Russian lettering inside of it. Now, this thing is not consistently reported. It's sometimes reported as hieroglyphs, but overall it said that there was Russian or Cyrillic or something similar to that inside. Stalin, after World War II, just like everybody else, brought over some nuclear physicists, some aerodynamic experts to his side. And everybody did this. The British, the French, the Americans, everybody did it. So don't come down on Stalin here. He was just keeping up with the times. And one of the things he probably would have got were the Horten brothers' flying wing design. The reason I bring this up is because the flying wing design is what we know today as the B-2 stealth bomber. It's a flying wing design that Northrop spent decades trying to perfect. And the Horten brothers had flying almost from the very start. They were the visionaries. It was a prototypical stealth aircraft. They didn't intend for it to be stealthy, it just happened to be stealthy. Just like the Mosquito was not intended to be stealthy, but it happened to be stealthy. And because of its unusual aerodynamics, it would have been very much able to pull off a near stall and recover with a skilled enough pilot. So it's fully possible that Uncle Joe Stalin had managed to take a late war German aircraft, reverse engineer it, and fly a test flight. This is a little bit controversial, and I will admit that. But the same token, it's far more possible for it to have happened than an alien from another species deciding to come down and crash on Earth. Now, the reason I'm so against the idea of alien spacecraft on Earth is simply because I look at ourselves and I say it makes no sense. If we send up a space shuttle, if we send up anything and it does not perform according to what we expect, we shut everything down for a couple of years and try to figure out what's wrong. And I think any intelligent species would do the same. There's some people who claim that our Doppler radar for some reason messes up the drives of these aliens. I think that's really unlikely because if you're coming through the vast radiation belts, not only from outer space, but Earth's atmosphere itself, it's very, very, very unlikely that a Doppler radar pulse is going to do a lick worth of damage to your systems. Solar flare, 10 to the plus 51 gigawatts, whereas radar is like 1,000 kilowatts. The power difference is extreme, so if they can survive one, it doesn't make sense they cannot survive the other. So the problem becomes, what exactly crashed in 1947, and what happened to it afterwards? My personal theory? Nothing extraordinary crashed. Well, let me redefine that. Nothing extraordinary crashed to us nowadays, but back then, they were developing the U-2 spy plane, or at least prototypes for it. They had the idea of going high up and fast and very powerful in the air. And think about that. Throughout the 1960s and 1950s and even to the 1970s, UFO sightings were things that were high up, that were kind of steely, that reflected, and they were going way fast in the air. That's exactly the aerial doctrine of the day. They wanted high, fast-moving stuff that couldn't be intercepted, like the U-2, like the SR-71, like 1,000 other things that were developed around that time. The D-21 drones, for example. That is what I think happened on that day. I do not believe the weather balloon cover story for one instant. Because everybody knew what a weather balloon was. They couldn't have hidden a weather balloon cover story under a weather balloon cover story. I also don't believe it was the high altitude jump pressure tests that they were doing with dummies. Be a farmer, be whatever, whoever recovers this thing would recognize a dummy from a real person. Because dummies aren't really that detailed even to this day. If you go to your local Walmart, to your whatever it might be, the dummy would not pass for a real person no matter what. If you look at Mythbusters, Buster, their crash test dummy, did not look like a real person, especially not after the first couple experiments where they blew him up. That being said, it's so hard to tell what exactly they were testing. Because we know about the U-2, which came about 5 to 10 years later. We know about the SR-71, which came 10 years later. We know about the F-117, which came in the 1970s. And we know nothing what happened since then. Whatever happened to the remains of whatever crash at Roswell has been so classified that nobody will ever know what it is. And there are people out there that say that's where our technology comes from. To that I call out horse hockey. Humans are responsible for a lot of our own technology. The transistor is really just an advanced, vacuum tube. The jet did not evolve from a propeller. It was its own technology. But it was the ideas of people going. The rocket engines have such a convoluted evolution from the Chinese setting off fireworks to the modern day ICBMs that it's ridiculous. But the fact is, when we go to space, when Elon Musk goes to space, when NASA goes to space, when Russia goes to space, they strap what they have on a rocket. Modern fighter jets, the F-22, the F-35, the various stealth fighters being developed by the Russians and the Chinese, they're not using radical new technology. None of them is suddenly going off with frictionless propellant and hovering off like a Harrier does from the launch pad. These things are just simply better built jets. And if you want the truth, we're not going to get anywhere with better built jets or better built rockets. This is old technology. This is 19th century stuff. This is ridiculousness that we are still using this in 2020. So if we had managed to get a hold of some alien technology at Roswell that was not Russian, how on earth would we be using it? And in fact, could we even be using it? I submit to you that if I took a laptop back to the Stone Age, somehow wired this thing up with Wi-Fi and everything else so it was fully functional, the cavemen could use it, but they couldn't produce one of their own. Assuming somehow these alien beings somehow managed to force their way across the cosmos and managed to land on our little insignificant planet through error or through actual intent, they could show us their flux capacitor. Sorry, I'm just going to use a flux capacitor because I find it an amusing bit of technology. and we would have no idea how to recreate it. None whatsoever. The same way that to this day we can't recreate Greek fire from the Middle Ages, we can't recreate Roman concrete, we can't recreate any of the massive things that we have done before. So I suggest to you that if we had this technology gifted to us, even in a bundle, it would not have been possible for us to reverse engineer it. We don't have the exotic materials. We don't have the manpower. We don't have the mind power. Our biggest geniuses, Einstein, Stephen Hawking, the people that you would most likely put in charge of such a project, were simply content to sit around and do mathematical equations. Now, what they did was fantastic, but at the same token, it was not enough to break the light barrier. We are still limited by light speed technology. And that's true for both our processors that we use in everything that we have today, and it's also true in our space technology. Our space technology is woefully behind. We made a major mistake in the 1950s and the 1960s when we decided not to allow ourselves to use nuclear propulsion in outer space. It's understandable why people would not want to put a nuclear reactor on a rocket, because if the thing blows up, yeah, bad things happen. At the same token, rockets really don't blow up every day. It's a very rare occurrence. And quite frankly, the rockets that we do send up are incredibly reliable. Elon Musk has a pretty good track record. NASA has a pretty good track record, even with the dodgy technology in the space shuttle. And most importantly, the Russians, I can't remember the last time one of theirs failed, and they've been running that technology since the 1960s. So, the question is, if we have alien technology, and if Bob Lazar is right, and they're working on reverse engineering it, what's happened to it? Well, quite likely, they brought in people like Bob Lazar, they brought in the best minds they could, and we still can't figure out what it is. Bob Lazar mentioned there was an attempt to fuel one of the alien reactors with plutonium instead of element 115, and it resulted in disaster. He didn't go into whatever that disaster is, but I would imagine if you tried to put diesel in a petrol engine, it's something like that, except on a nuclear level, which would be very, very catastrophic, especially considering plutonium is a very, very unpleasant element to work with. Plutonium basically has one use: nuclear bombs. It is not a very good fissile material, it is not a very good nuclear reactor material, and it's quite frankly horrible to deal with. But coming back to space technology, let's go back through everything that's happened in the past 40 years. And we're going to find everything that we have is an evolution. Now I'm going to pick on Elon Musk here because I have an idea for a future episode that this will all come back to. Elon Musk in the 1990s went to Russia and said, I would like to buy some old ICBMs and use them to put my satellites up. And the deal came and it went and stuff like that. And at the end of it, Elon Musk basically wound up at SpaceX, where he is today, where he's developing his own technology, which is recycled Russian technology, because Russian boosters were always better than the United States boosters. The United States boosters were more powerful, but they were bigger and more expensive. Whereas the Russians, they can pop those things off left, right, and center. Now I ask you, if Elon Musk had gone there with his billions, while Moscow was in financial ruin, as was the entire former USSR, now Russia, would they not have gladly given him that technology? And if the United States found out one of their billionaires was snooping around Russia for technology to put in people into space, would they have not taken advantage of that opportunity and said, come on with us, use your extensive manufacturing resources, and build some secret space programs for us, whatever they might be. The X-38, for example, the robotic shuttle that stays up for 2 years and nobody knows what it does. That's a Boeing project. You'll find that the defense contractors remain the same on these projects. Lockheed, Boeing, Raytheon, and Elon Musk with SpaceX and Tesla is just starting to get into that field. He's just starting to merge into that military-industrial complex that we were warned against 50 years ago. The fact is, the military-industrial complex has already gained control of everything it wants. It doesn't need us. It doesn't need you or I. Whatever technology they got in 1947, whatever ideas they might have got in 1947, are meaningless. What has happened is we have been put on one track. Let's call it the safe track. We send our space programs and our space shuttles and our space orbiters on the safe track. To go to Mars takes about a year. And this is why I do not think a mission to Mars is possible with our current technology. Because think about it. You're going to spend a year in basically a school bus with 3 to 4 other people, all of whom have been trained, have different levels of hygiene, have different cultural levels, stuff like that. This is a recipe for disaster. Even aboard a submarine, it would be difficult. In a submarine, you can at least surface and go for port. If you send the same thing to Mars, you can't get to port for another 3 to 5 years. But we're still going to Mars with chemical rockets, with the same thing the Chinese were doing almost 1,000 years ago. And we have yet to abandon that scrap of technology. Once again, there's 2 possibilities. We're on the safe route, and there's an advanced route. Back in the 2000s, NASA got hacked, and a young man, I forget his name, who's currently on the run in various countries, he said that he saw that there were off-world agents. Off-world. Now, this is before the space station really became permanently inhabited. And so an off-world agent would have had to have been somebody who's expected to be off-world for quite some time. There was no space command like there is today. There was no NASA permanent presence in orbit. All there was a space shuttle and the husk of a space station. And for that, this young man, whose name I will reveal next week probably, is unfortunately he's been under serious persecution to this day. It's scary to think that not only was the NASA terminal unlocked that he went into, because they're that arrogant that they don't think you're going to look into it, but also it's scary to think that that information is in the clear for anybody at NASA. NASA, never a straight answer. This is what I firmly believe. Now, the average person at NASA probably has a top secret clearance. I'm pretty sure I've said this before. I'll say it again. Top secret means nothing. Top secret is boring. Never listen to anybody who says, "Oh, I've got a top secret clearance. I could tell you what I know, but I could kill you." No, top secrets is like the military basically saying, yeah, you've met the basic qualifications. You want to hear good stuff, you want to hear colors. When you start hearing purple, orange, ultraviolet, those are people with some real secrets to talk about. Top secret, virtually any one of you that's listening today could attain this clearance level, if you want to call it a clearance level, and just simply, it means virtually nothing. You're given clearance to exactly the project you need to know about and nothing else. You're given your piece of paper that says these are your orders of the day, and that is your clearance level. Top secret. That's it in a nutshell. And this is also why it's so hard to find information on anything in the government. because you have to know exactly which department you need to request it from. You have to have the clearance to be able to request it. And you also have to know exactly what document it is. So, God forbid, it's been 5 years since that document was published. It's been transferred to another department. You have no chance of getting it in a Freedom of Information request. Both the United States and Canada, and I suspect the rest of the Western world. And since they're always merging documents and merging departments, it's really hard to pull out what's being hidden from us. So, don't expect the disclosure to happen tomorrow. Don't expect the disclosure to happen anytime. Because those who are in the know already know what they need to know. And if Donald Trump was not the one to disclose it, then whatever he knows about it is obviously so critical that he doesn't want us to know about it. Maybe they've included him in their plans. Maybe they just simply showed him something that's so scary that even he's willing to shut his trap. Not really sure. But like I said, at that level of clearance, you get exposed to things that will quite frankly blow your mind. I'm going to give you an example. The lines that are set up of radar stations and radar chains, etc., that prevent us against attack from the Soviet Union, from China, etc., those are way above top secret. And the Chinese and the Russians are very good at hacking top secret clearances. So of course they came up with a clearance level that's way above anything that we can imagine. And indeed, we can't even imagine the top levels of clearance. Even the United States President probably does not know how far up the clearance goes. Back to 1947, if this stuff was around since 1947 and it was classified, who knows whether this stuff was lost, abandoned, or if it's just so classified so high, so bloody high, that the only people that know about it can't do anything about it. For actual information and technology to develop, you need to have some freedom of access to it. A scientist can work on something like a microchip and develop it further, but you have to give them access to it in order for them to be able to look at it and say, okay, this is a better path for the electrons to go through. I can micronize this, I can do this. They still need access to that information. And if that information gets classified high enough, that's never going to happen. In 2016, they started declassifying documents from World War I. That's right, in 1917, they classified a few coding booklets, and they didn't get declassified till 100 years later. Imagine that. Coding from World War I, scrambling messages, keeping them secret. For over 100 years it lay dormant when nobody was using it. Nobody. There wasn't a soul on earth that looked back to those code books and say, oh, let's go back to those, because they're always developing new things. Since nobody had looked at them, nobody thought to declassify them. And that's why they remained classified for so long. That's why we have so many secrets in our government, in our ministries, and even within our police departments that, quite frankly, we don't even know what's classified. To audit this stuff would be a nightmare. You would need a task force of so many different disciplines to be able to even begin to understand all the things that were shoved into the border of existence. Tesla was a remarkable inventor, but when he passed away, all of his technology, all of his ideas were classified. And they're so heavily classified, they're still classified to this day. Whatever happened in 1947, whatever happened in 1945, whatever happened whenever somebody significant left us technology, there is so much sitting in a buffer that we don't know what to do with it. It's not on our fighter planes, it's not on our jets, it's not in our military's hands, it's nowhere. We have this big backlog of technology that's sitting there with nobody and nothing looking at it. We've got bright young minds. We have grad students that are developing remarkable theories. We have scientists that come up with synthetic fuels, that come up with incredible ideas every single day. And they can't see what is going on behind closed doors because they don't have the security clearance for it. It's a crying shame, I tell you. It's a crying shame. Until we actually figure out a way to release this technology into the civilian world, it's going to remain the purview of a few select individuals. Those who have the security clearance, the money, the time, and the technology. Lockheed probably has it. Raytheon probably has it. They might not understand it, but they have it. Elon Musk, I'm not sure. I think he has it. But for your local university professor who is experimenting on nuclear physics and has an idea about quantum tunneling, he doesn't have it. And again, that's a crying shame, because he should have it. He should be able to experiment with the latest ideas, the latest technology, and knowing exactly what's going on. But that, unfortunately, is where we're going to leave this particular episode. We wish to thank you for joining us for the Silverlight Show. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please email us at silverlightservices@gmail.com, all lowercase, silverlightservices@gmail.com. For those of you who have been listening this whole time, we thank you for your attention. And for everybody else out there, welcome aboard.